Food prices in New Zealand have gone up a lot recently. People often think that food in Australia is much cheaper than what it is in New Zealand. I recently went for a trip to Brisbane, so I thought it'd be quite good to put this view to the test and see if food in Australia really is cheaper than what it is in New Zealand. So for my comparison, I looked at two supermarkets. It's the same chain that operates in both New Zealand and Australia. In Australia, it's called Woolworths. And in New Zealand, traditionally, it used to be called Countdown, but they are now rebranding to also be called Woolworths. I kind of looked at just a random sample of products, which I would consider to be basics for our household. I didn't always look at the cheapest brands, so if there's brands that we would normally buy, and I know you get equivalent ones in Australia, I looked at those. But I try to keep the products as close to the New Zealand equivalent as possible. So anyway, let's have a look and see how the prices compare. Okay, let's take a little pause so that I can explain to you what's coming next. What I've done is I am going to be comparing the different products from Australia and New Zealand. I have them side by side so you can see the prices for each of them. I've also converted it to New Zealand dollars. The current exchange rate is for every 1 New Zealand dollar you get 90 cents. That is the exchange rate that I have used for my calculations. When I thought about this video, it sounded relatively simple, but when I started comparing the products, I saw that the quantities that you can get in New Zealand is quite different to what you can get in Australia. So that made the calculations a little bit more tricky and involved a little bit of a spreadsheet to try and convert it. You'll see the mince products, for example, is 400 grams in New Zealand and 500 grams in Australia. So I have made sure that these are consistent across. Another little quirky thing is Coke cans in Australia is 375 mils and in New Zealand it's only 330 mils. So let's have a look how the prices compare. So those were the individual products and their prices. 3 products stood out to me as a little bit surprising. I was quite surprised that butter was so much more expensive in Australia than it is in New Zealand, 60% more. I was also quite surprised about eggs being so much more expensive in New Zealand. There was about a 46% difference in prices between those. And the other one was the Cadbury dairy milk, which was a lot more expensive in Australia, about 41%. But so how would it look overall if you buy all 21 products? So if you combine them all, your total cost in Australia would be $138 versus in New Zealand, $152. So that gives you about a $13 difference between the two countries. This made me wonder why food would be more expensive in New Zealand than in Australia. But when you start having a look into it, you can see that goods and services tax is not applied to products in Australia. So not all food are exempt from GST, but it's quite a long list. On my list, only the Coke cans and the Cadbury dairy chocolate would be taxed. All the rest of the products would be GST free. So that made me wonder, if you take the tax off the New Zealand food as well, how would the total compare between the two countries? So in New Zealand, we actually have 15% goods and services tax, not just 10% like they do in Australia. So if you adjust all the taxable products and take off the 15%, you're actually left with $132 versus the $138 that you would pay in Australia, which is quite interesting. So if you remove the tax, then the food is actually cheaper in New Zealand. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think, or how do the prices compare to your country?